Officer Alexander Carter had always been known for his strict demeanor and no-nonsense attitude. As a senior officer at the bustling Newberry Police Department, he prided himself on maintaining order and discipline. However, his tough exterior often overshadowed his sense of fairness, a flaw that would soon come back to haunt him. It was a typical Monday morning at the station, and the place was alive with activity. Officers shuffled paperwork, phones rang incessantly, and civilians came in with complaints and reports. Among the visitors that day was a distinguished man in his early 50s, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. His presence was understated but commanding. The man approached the front desk, where Alexander was buried in his tasks. Without looking up, Alexander curtly asked, "What do you need?" The man responded politely, "Good morning. I'm here to see Captain Raymond." Alexander barely glanced at him. "The captain's busy. You'll have to come back another time." Unfazed, the man added, "This matter is urgent. Please let him know that Robert Langston is here to meet with him." Hearing the name, Alexander's annoyance flared. To him, the name carried no significance, and he assumed this man was trying to throw his weight around to skip the queue. "I don't care who you are," Alexander snapped. "Everyone waits their turn here. Sit down and don't make a scene." Little did Alexander know, Robert Langston was not just any visitor. He was a respected judge assigned to conduct a surprise evaluation of the Newberry Police Department. His unannounced visit was meant to observe the officers in their unfiltered environment, and Alexander's dismissive behavior was painting a vivid picture. Minutes ticked by, and Judge Langston remained standing, observing the chaotic yet systematic rhythm of the station. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to Alexander's growing impatience. Unable to stand the man's unyielding presence, Alexander finally barked, "Didn't I tell you to sit down? You're in the way here." Judge Langston met his gaze with quiet confidence. "I don't believe I'm in the way, Officer Carter. I simply need to see Captain Raymond about an important matter." Alexander's temper flared. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but you don't run this station. If you don't sit down and wait, I'll have you removed." Langston's calm expression shifted slightly, reflecting his disappointment. "Officer Carter, I suggest you tread carefully. You're making assumptions without knowing who I am or why I'm here." This only fueled Alexander's frustration. "Don't lecture me on how to do my job," he spat, stepping closer to Langston. The situation escalated when Langston, unwilling to back down, made a move toward the captain's office. "If you won't notify the captain, I'll speak with him myself," he said. Infuriated, Alexander stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "I said you're not going anywhere." The atmosphere in the station grew tense as officers and civilians turned their attention to the confrontation. Alexander, determined to assert his authority, reached out and grabbed Langston's arm. "I've had enough of your attitude," he said. Langston's calm voice cut through the tension. "Officer Carter, I advise you to let go of my arm. You're overstepping your bounds." Alexander saw this as a challenge and acted impulsively. In a flash of anger, he raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap across Langston's face. The room went silent. Everyone froze in disbelief as Langston straightened, his cheek reddening. His expression was no longer calm. It was resolute and authoritative. "Officer Carter," Langston said evenly, "you've just made a serious mistake." Before Alexander could respond, the door to Captain Raymond's office flew open. The captain, having heard the commotion, stepped out and immediately took in the scene. His eyes widened as he recognized the man standing before Alexander. "Judge Langston," the captain exclaimed, his voice a mixture of shock and horror. "What's going on here?" Alexander's face turned pale. "Wait, Judge Langston?" "Yes, Officer Carter," Captain Raymond said, his tone laced with anger. "The Honorable Robert Langston, our visiting judge, sent to evaluate this department, and you just assaulted him." Langston, still composed despite the altercation, addressed the captain directly. "Captain Raymond, I think it's best if we discuss this matter in private. Officer Carter's conduct needs immediate attention." Captain Raymond nodded. ushering Langston into his office while glaring at Alexander. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," he muttered before slamming the door behind him. Alexander stood frozen in place, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. Whispers spread among the other officers like wildfire, and Alexander realized he had just jeopardized not only his career but the reputation of the entire department. The station was abuzz with tension after the incident. Whispers echoed in every corner, and Officer Alexander Carter could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He stood rooted to the spot, replaying the moment he struck Judge Langston over and over in his mind. His pride, his career, and his reputation were all crumbling in an instant. Inside Captain Raymond's office, Judge Langston sat across from the captain, his calm demeanor returning. He was no stranger to dealing with volatile situations, but this incident went beyond personal insult. It was a blatant abuse of authority. "Captain Raymond," Langston began, "this isn't just about what happened to me. Officer Carter's behavior reflects poorly on the entire department. If he treated me, a judge, with such disregard, I can only imagine how he interacts with civilians." Captain Raymond, a seasoned officer, looked visibly distressed. "Your Honor, let me first extend my deepest apologies. This is not how we run our station, and I assure you, action will be taken." Langston nodded but remained firm. "Action must be more than disciplinary. This is a wake-up call. Your department needs to review its training, protocols, and culture." As they continued their conversation, Alexander waited outside, unable to ignore the murmurs around him. His fellow officers gave him sidelong glances, some shaking their heads in disappointment. The gravity of his actions finally began to sink in. When the door to the captain's office finally opened, Alexander braced himself. Captain Raymond's face was a storm of barely controlled fury, while Judge Langston remained composed but resolute. "Carter, in my office." "Now," the captain barked. Alexander followed, his heart pounding. As soon as the door closed behind him, Captain Raymond unleashed his frustration. "What were you thinking, Carter?" he roared. "Do you realize what you've done? You assaulted a sitting judge. Not only have you embarrassed yourself, but you've also put this entire department under scrutiny." Alexander stammered, "Sir, I didn't know." "That's no excuse," Captain Raymond interrupted. "You didn't bother to listen or treat him with basic respect. Instead, you let your ego and temper get the better of you." Judge Langston interjected, his tone measured but firm. "Officer Carter, this isn't just about me. Your actions today revealed a deeper issue. You have a duty to serve and protect, but you acted with arrogance and aggression. This isn't how justice operates." Alexander hung his head, his usual confidence shattered. "Your Honor, I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly." Langston's gaze was unwavering. "Mistakes have consequences, Officer Carter. What matters now is how you choose to address them." Captain Raymond took a deep breath, his voice softening but still stern. "Carter, effective immediately, you're suspended pending an internal review. You'll also be required to attend anger management training and a formal evaluation." Alexander's face fell. Suspension was a harsh blow, but he knew he had no grounds to argue. "I understand, sir," he said quietly. As he left the office, the weight of his actions bore down on him. The once confident officer now faced an uncertain future. News of the incident spread quickly beyond the station. Within hours, local media caught wind of the story, painting Alexander as the embodiment of unchecked authority. Headlines like "Officer Assaults Visiting Judge" and "Police Misconduct Sparks Outrage" dominated social media, drawing intense public scrutiny to the Newberry Police Department. Meanwhile, Alexander found himself isolated. Colleagues who once respected him now kept their distance, and his family expressed their disappointment in his behavior. At home, Alexander reflected on his actions. He realized how his pride and temper had led him astray, but he also began to see the larger issues Judge Langston had pointed out. For years, he had operated with a narrow mindset, enforcing the law without considering the principles of fairness and respect. Judge Langston, meanwhile, took steps to ensure the incident served as a catalyst for change. He scheduled a meeting with city officials and law enforcement leaders to discuss reforms within the police department. His focus wasn't on punishing Alexander, but on addressing the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to thrive. As for Captain Raymond, he worked tirelessly to salvage the department's reputation. He ordered mandatory training sessions for all officers, emphasizing de-escalation, empathy, and professionalism. He also established an anonymous reporting system to encourage accountability within the ranks. Alexander's suspension gave him ample time to reflect on his choices. He began attending therapy sessions for anger management, where he confronted the root of his temper. Slowly, he started to understand the importance of humility and self-awareness. Despite the turmoil, the incident planted the seeds for transformation. Both Alexander and the Newberry Police Department were on a path toward redemption, though the road ahead would be anything but easy. Alexander's suspension sent shockwaves through the community. Many saw it as a small victory in the larger battle for police accountability, while others viewed it as a humiliation for the department. The local press kept the story alive, inviting community leaders, legal experts, and citizens to weigh in. A week into his suspension, Alexander received an invitation from the Newberry Community Justice Alliance, a grassroots organization advocating for police reform. Reluctantly, he agreed to attend a public forum where community members could share their experiences with law enforcement. The event, held in a packed church hall, was tense. The air buzzed with frustration, pain, and anticipation. Alexander sat quietly in the front row, feeling the eyes of dozens of people on him. One by one, citizens shared their stories, tales of racial profiling, excessive force, and the erosion of trust in the police. Alexander's stomach churned as he realized how blind he had been to the harm caused by unchecked authority. When it was his turn to speak, he hesitated, gripping the microphone tightly. "I won't pretend that my actions were defensible," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "What I did to Judge Langston was wrong, and it's a reflection of flaws within myself and within the system I represent. I'm here today to listen, to learn, and to take accountability." His words were met with a mix of skepticism and cautious applause. While many in the room remained unconvinced, a few saw the glimmer of genuine remorse in his eyes. After the forum, Alexander stayed to speak with attendees. He listened to their stories, absorbing their pain and anger. It was an eye-opening experience that marked the beginning of his transformation. Judge Langston, meanwhile, was working behind the scenes to turn the incident into a force for positive change. Using his influence, he pushed for a series of reforms within the Newberry Police Department, including improved training, community engagement programs, and stricter accountability measures. Langston also made a bold move. He requested to meet with Alexander privately. The two met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. Alexander arrived nervously, unsure of what to expect. When he saw Langston sitting calmly with a cup of coffee, he felt a wave of unease. "Your Honor," Alexander said, approaching cautiously. "Take a seat, Officer Carter," Langston replied, gesturing to the chair across from him. As Alexander sat down, Langston began without preamble. "I'm not here to rehash what happened. What's done is done. I'm here to talk about what comes next." Alexander nodded, his gaze steady. "I've been trying to figure that out myself. I know I've got a lot to learn." "Good," Langston said, "because change starts with humility. You've seen firsthand how dangerous unchecked power can be. Now, you have an opportunity to use your experience to make things better, not just for yourself, but for others." The judge outlined his vision. Alexander would become an advocate for reform within the department, using his suspension as a springboard for growth. He would participate in community outreach programs, mentor younger officers, and share his story as a cautionary tale. Alexander was taken aback. "You're willing to give me another chance?" Langston's expression softened. "We all make mistakes, Officer Carter. The question is whether we learn from them. This is your chance to prove that you can." Inspired by Langston's words, Alexander threw himself into his suspension with purpose. He began volunteering at local organizations, working closely with marginalized communities to understand their struggles. He attended workshops on bias and de-escalation, slowly unlearning the toxic habits he had developed over years on the force. One of the most impactful moments came during a ride-along with a community outreach officer named Maria Alvarez. Unlike Alexander, Maria had built her career on empathy and connection. As they visited neighborhoods, Maria introduced him to residents, many of whom had harbored resentment toward the police. At one stop, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gaines approached Alexander. "You're the officer from the news, aren't you?" she asked, her tone sharp. Alexander braced himself. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." Mrs. Gaines eyed him critically. "Well, you've got a lot to make up for. But I'll tell you this, admitting you were wrong is a good start." Her words stuck with him, fueling his determination to rebuild trust. At the same time, the department was undergoing its own transformation. Captain Raymond, under pressure from both Langston and the community, implemented sweeping changes. Officers were required to attend mandatory training sessions, and a new oversight committee was established to address misconduct. For Alexander, the journey was far from over, but as he stood at the crossroads of his career, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he was ready to walk it with humility and integrity. The suspension had been a humbling experience for Alexander, but his journey toward redemption truly began when he was invited to a mandatory department meeting. Organized by Captain Raymond, the meeting aimed to address the fallout from Alexander's actions and the systemic issues it had exposed. Walking into the precinct, Alexander felt the weight of his colleagues' stares. Some were supportive, while others were judgmental, seeing his suspension as a black mark on the department. Captain Raymond stood at the front of the room, his expression stern yet resolute. "This isn't just about Officer Carter," the captain began. "It's about every single one of us. What happened with Judge Langston has opened a Pandora's box of issues within this department, issues we can no longer ignore." The meeting introduced a new code of conduct, emphasizing respect, empathy, and accountability. The captain also announced a department-wide review of protocols and promised to hold officers to a higher standard. During the discussion, one of Alexander's peers, Officer Grant, raised his hand. "With all due respect, Captain, why is Carter still here? He tarnished our reputation." Alexander felt the sting of Grant's words, but didn't back down. Rising to his feet, he addressed the room. "I get it. I made a mistake, one that I can't take back. But what I've learned is that being a good officer isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about serving people with fairness and humility. I failed at that, but I'm here to do better. For myself and for this department." His words were met with silence. Slowly, a few officers nodded, acknowledging his sincerity. Judge Langston's words continued to echo in Alexander's mind. Change starts with humility. Determined to turn his misstep into a meaningful lesson, Alexander began working on community engagement projects. One of these projects involved organizing a neighborhood cleanup event in collaboration with local residents. Partnering with Maria Alvarez, the outreach officer who had guided him during his ride-alongs, Alexander worked tirelessly to bring people together. On the day of the event, Alexander was nervous. Would the community accept him, or would they still see him as the officer who had abused his authority? As he arrived at the park, he was surprised to see Judge Langston among the volunteers. The judge gave him a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Actions speak louder than words, Officer Carter. Let's see what you've got." The event was a success. As Alexander worked side by side with residents, he listened to their concerns and shared his own journey of self-reflection. By the end of the day, he felt a glimmer of hope that trust could be rebuilt. One particular moment stood out. A young boy named Malik approached Alexander, holding a hand-drawn picture of a police officer shaking hands with a community member. "This is what it should be like," Malik said. Alexander knelt down, accepting the drawing with a lump in his throat. "You're right, Malik, and I promise to do my part to make it happen." As Alexander worked to rebuild his reputation, Judge Langston continued to monitor his progress. The judge saw potential in Alexander's efforts and decided to take things a step further. One afternoon, Langston invited Alexander to a meeting with a group of community leaders. The meeting was tense, with many leaders expressing skepticism about Alexander's sincerity. "I understand your doubts," Alexander said, addressing the room. "I've spent years enforcing laws without truly understanding the people they affect, but I'm here to change that. I want to learn from you and work with you to make things right." One of the leaders, a retired teacher named Mrs. Jefferson, spoke up. "Talk is cheap, Officer Carter. What concrete steps are you willing to take?" Alexander didn't hesitate. "I'm willing to be held accountable. I'll participate in community programs, mentor younger officers, and advocate for reforms within the department. I'll also share my story to show others the dangers of letting power go unchecked." His earnestness began to break down the walls of skepticism. Langston added, "Alexander is a work in progress, but his willingness to face his mistakes head-on is a testament to his potential. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with individuals willing to take the first step." By the end of the meeting, Alexander had earned a tentative vote of confidence. The leaders agreed to give him a chance to prove himself, but with the understanding that one misstep could undo all his progress. The experience left Alexander feeling a mix of relief and determination. For the first time, he saw a clear path forward, a path that required him to not only rebuild trust but also become a catalyst for change within his department and the community. As he walked out of the meeting, Langston placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got a long road ahead, Carter, but I believe you're capable of walking it." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of the judge's trust. "Thank you, Your Honor. I won't let you down." Alexander's journey toward redemption reached a critical juncture when he was asked to speak at a local town hall event. Organized by Judge Langston and community leaders, the meeting aimed to address the growing mistrust between the police force and the citizens they served. Standing in front of a packed auditorium, Alexander felt the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him. The faces in the crowd reflected skepticism, frustration, and curiosity. He knew he had to approach this moment with complete honesty. "Good evening," Alexander began, his voice steady, but tinged with humility. "My name is Alexander Carter. I'm a police officer, but I'm also a man who made a serious mistake. A mistake that hurt not just an individual but an entire community." He recounted the incident with Judge Langston, acknowledging his misuse of authority and the lessons he had learned since. "I let my badge become a shield for my ego. But the truth is, the badge is supposed to be a symbol of service and respect. I failed to honor that, and for that, I am deeply sorry." As he spoke, Alexander shared stories of his efforts to rebuild trust, from mentoring young officers to working on community projects. He also highlighted the changes happening within the department, including new training programs and policies aimed at fostering accountability. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before Mrs. Jefferson, the retired teacher, stood up. "Actions speak louder than words, Officer Carter. But tonight, your words have given me hope. Let's see if your actions can match them." The crowd erupted into cautious applause. For Alexander, it was a small but significant step forward. As Alexander continued to work on rebuilding his reputation, he faced a new challenge that tested his resolve. A routine patrol brought him face to face with a group of teenagers arguing in a park. One of the teens, Malik, the boy who had given him a drawing at the community cleanup event, was at the center of the dispute. Alexander approached cautiously, recognizing the need to de-escalate the situation without resorting to force. "Hey, guys," he said, his tone calm and non-threatening. "What's going on here?" The teens were initially defensive, accusing each other of stealing a basketball. Alexander listened patiently, giving each of them a chance to explain their side of the story. As the tension began to subside, he suggested a solution: a friendly game of basketball to settle the disagreement. The teens agreed, and Alexander even joined in as a referee. By the end of the game, the kids were laughing and shaking hands, their anger forgotten. Malik pulled Alexander aside afterward. "Thanks, Officer Carter. You handled that way better than most cops would have." Alexander smiled. That's what I'm here for, Malik. To help, not to hurt. The encounter left Alexander feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It was a reminder that his role as an officer wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about building relationships and making a positive impact. Judge Langston continued to be a guiding presence in Alexander's life, inviting him to participate in a special program for at-risk youth. The program, called Bridges to a Better Future, aimed to provide mentorship and support for teenagers struggling with family issues, poverty, or other challenges. During his first session, Alexander shared his story with the group, emphasizing the importance of accountability and personal growth. "We all make mistakes," he told the kids. "What matters is how we learn from them and how we move forward." One of the teens, a girl named Tasha, was particularly skeptical. "What do you know about struggle?" she challenged. "You're a cop. You've got power. You don't know what it's like to be powerless." Her words hit Alexander hard, but he didn't shy away from the conversation. "You're right, Tasha," he admitted. "I haven't faced the same struggles you have, but I do know what it's like to feel lost, to make choices I regret, and I know that change is possible if we're willing to fight for it." Over time, Alexander's honesty and vulnerability began to win the kids over. He formed a special bond with Tasha, helping her navigate her aspirations of becoming a lawyer despite the challenges she faced. By the end of the program's first month, Alexander saw the impact of his efforts. The kids were more engaged, more hopeful, and more willing to trust him. For Alexander, it was proof that redemption wasn't just about clearing his own name. It was about lifting others up along the way. The program also brought Alexander closer to Judge Langston, who praised his dedication. "You've come a long way, Carter," the judge said during one of their conversations. "But don't get complacent. This is just the beginning." Alexander nodded, understanding the truth in Langston's words. He was proud of the progress he had made, but he knew there was still much work to be done. Alexander Carter's journey of redemption took a personal turn as he began reflecting on the life he had been neglecting outside his badge. While he was making progress professionally, he realized that his strained relationship with his younger sister, Emily, needed attention. Emily had always been his biggest supporter growing up, but Alexander's arrogance and detachment over the years had created a wedge between them. One evening, Alexander visited Emily's apartment unannounced, holding a box of her favorite pastries. Surprised but wary, Emily opened the door. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I came to talk," he said sincerely, "and maybe try to fix what I broke." Over coffee, Alexander admitted his shortcomings. "I let the badge and my ego get in the way of what truly matters. I know I haven't been there for you, and I'm sorry." Emily sighed, her eyes softening. "It wasn't just the badge, Alex. You pushed everyone away, including me. But I see you're trying to change, and that means a lot." The conversation ended with a heartfelt hug, marking the beginning of a renewed sibling bond. For Alexander, this personal victory felt as significant as his professional strides. Alexander's resolve was tested when he found himself in a high-stakes situation. Responding to a robbery call at a local convenience store, he arrived to find the suspect holding the store clerk at gunpoint. Adrenaline coursed through Alexander as he assessed the scene. The suspect, a young man barely out of his teens, was visibly scared. "Put the gun down," Alexander said calmly, his voice steady. "We can talk this out. Nobody needs to get hurt." The young man's hands trembled. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he stammered. I needed money to pay for my sister's surgery." Alexander's heart ached at the desperation in the boy's voice. Maintaining his composure, he continued to negotiate. "I understand you're scared, but this isn't the way. Let's figure out another solution together. Just put the gun down, and I promise to help you." After what felt like an eternity, the young man lowered the weapon and surrendered. As backup officers arrived, Alexander stayed by the boy's side, reassuring him. Later, Judge Langston commended Alexander for his restraint and empathy. "You handled that situation with the kind of care and professionalism we need more of in this world," the judge said. The incident became a pivotal moment for Alexander, reaffirming his commitment to serving his community with compassion. One afternoon, while taking a break at a local cafe, Alexander overheard a heated argument at a nearby table. A young woman was angrily confronting a man about a fraudulent real estate deal that had cost her family their home. The man, dressed in an expensive suit, dismissed her concerns. "That's business, sweetheart. Maybe next time, your family should read the fine print." Alexander felt a surge of anger, but reminded himself to stay calm. He approached the table and addressed the man. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. It sounds like this young woman deserves some answers." The man scoffed. "And who are you? Her lawyer?" "No," Alexander replied evenly. "Just someone who doesn't appreciate seeing people being taken advantage of." The confrontation caught the attention of other patrons, putting pressure on the man to leave. After he stormed off, the young woman, who introduced herself as Mia, thanked Alexander profusely. "I'm just glad I could help," Alexander said with a smile. "If you need assistance filing a formal complaint, I can point you in the right direction." The chance encounter with Mia left Alexander reflecting on the importance of standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. It was another step in his journey toward becoming not just a better officer, but a better person. As the days went on, Alexander realized that his transformation wasn't just about undoing the wrongs of his past. It was about building a legacy of integrity and kindness. As Alexander Carter continued rebuilding his life and career, Judge Langston made an unexpected request. "Officer Carter," he said during a break in a court session, "join me for lunch tomorrow. There's something I want to discuss." Curious and slightly apprehensive, Alexander agreed. The next afternoon, he met the judge at a quiet bistro. Over a hearty meal, Judge Langston opened up about his own struggles and how he had almost lost his career decades ago due to a similar mix of pride and poor decisions. "When I was a young attorney," Langston began, "I let my ego cloud my judgment. I thought I was untouchable until I made a mistake that cost someone dearly. I had to work twice as hard to rebuild my reputation and prove that I had learned from my failures." Alexander listened intently as the judge continued. "You remind me of myself back then. You've made mistakes, yes, but what defines you is your willingness to change. Not everyone has the courage to face their flaws and fight to do better." The judge then handed Alexander a letter of recommendation. "This isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card," Langston said with a smile, "but it's a testament to your progress. Use it wisely." Alexander was overwhelmed by the gesture. "Thank you, Your Honor. I won't let you down." The conversation left Alexander more determined than ever to honor the trust others were beginning to place in him. Alexander's resolve was soon tested when he was assigned to work on a high-profile case involving a corrupt local businessman, Robert Gaines. Gaines was accused of running a money laundering operation that had devastated countless families, but his influence made him nearly untouchable. The case hit a personal nerve for Alexander, reminding him of his past failures to protect the vulnerable. Determined to make things right, he volunteered to go undercover to gather evidence against Gaines. Alexander spent weeks posing as a low-level enforcer in Gaines's network, earning the man's trust while covertly documenting his illegal activities. The work was dangerous, requiring Alexander to navigate a web of deceit and intimidation. One evening, Gaines invited Alexander to a private meeting. "You've proven yourself, Carter," Gaines said, unaware of Alexander's true identity. "I think you're ready to move up in the organization. Let me show you what we're really about." The meeting provided Alexander with critical evidence, including documents and recordings implicating Gaines in multiple crimes. But as he left the meeting, he realized he was being followed. A tense chase through the city ensued, with Alexander narrowly escaping his pursuers. When he finally reached safety, he handed over the evidence to his superiors. The next day, Gaines was arrested, and Alexander's bravery was praised by the department. With the Gaines case behind him, Alexander's reputation within the force began to change. Officers who had once doubted him now saw him as a capable and dedicated team member. His mentor, Sergeant Miller, couldn't have been prouder. "You've come a long way, Carter," Miller said one evening at the precinct. "You're not just a better officer, you're a better man." Alexander's personal life also continued to improve. His bond with his sister, Emily, grew stronger, and he began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring troubled teens who reminded him of himself at a younger age. One day, while visiting the youth center, Alexander ran into Mia, the woman he had helped in the cafe. She had successfully filed a case against the fraudulent real estate agent and was now working with a nonprofit that provided housing assistance to low-income families. "I couldn't have done it without your encouragement," Mia said, smiling. Their conversation turned into a budding friendship, and Alexander found himself opening up to the possibility of a meaningful relationship for the first time in years. As he stood before a group of teens at the youth center one evening, sharing his story of failure and redemption, Alexander realized how far he had come. He was no longer defined by his mistakes, but by the lessons he had learned and the lives he was now determined to impact positively. Months after his successful undercover operation against Robert Gaines, Alexander Carter had established himself as a respected and admired officer. His journey of redemption inspired those around him, but the greatest challenge was yet to come. One crisp morning, Alexander was summoned to the chief of police's office. Chief Reynolds, a no-nonsense leader, greeted him with an uncharacteristic smile. "Carter," Reynolds began, "we're rolling out a new mentorship program for rookie officers. We need someone experienced to lead it, someone who understands the highs and lows of this job better than most. That someone is you." Alexander was stunned. "Me? But Chief, are you sure? I'm not exactly the textbook example of a flawless officer." "That's precisely why you're the perfect candidate," Reynolds replied. "You've faced adversity, owned up to your mistakes, and proven yourself time and again. This department needs leaders who understand the value of second chances." After a moment of hesitation, Alexander nodded. "I'd be honored, Chief." The mentorship program became a new focus for Alexander, allowing him to guide young officers who reminded him of his younger self. He emphasized the importance of integrity, humility, and treating everyone with respect, regardless of their station in life. While his professional life was flourishing, Alexander's personal life brought a surprise. One evening, he received a letter from someone he hadn't heard from in years, his estranged father, Richard Carter. The letter was brief but heartfelt. "Alexander, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want the chance to explain. If you're willing, meet me at Riverside Cafe on Saturday at 3 p.m. Dad." The message reopened old wounds. Richard had abandoned their family when Alexander was just a boy, leaving him and Emily to fend for themselves. For years, Alexander harbored resentment, blaming his father for the struggles they endured. Despite his anger, Alexander decided to meet Richard, driven by a desire for closure. When Saturday arrived, he walked into the cafe, spotting an older man with gray hair and weary eyes sitting nervously at a corner table. "Alexander," Richard said, standing as his son approached. "Dad," Alexander replied, his voice guarded. The conversation that followed was emotional and raw. Richard explained how he had fallen into a spiral of debt and shame, feeling unworthy of his family. "I thought leaving would spare you the burden of my failures," Richard admitted, tears streaming down his face. Alexander listened, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and empathy. "You hurt us, Dad," he said, "but I've learned something over the past few years. People can change if they truly want to. If you're serious about making amends, I'm willing to give you a chance." The encounter marked the beginning of a tentative reconciliation. Richard promised to rebuild his relationship with Alexander and Emily, one step at a time. As Alexander's mentorship program gained momentum, a new recruit, Officer Ryan Hayes, caught his attention. Ryan was talented but impulsive, often making rash decisions that put himself and others at risk. During a routine patrol, Ryan ignored Alexander's instructions and chased a suspect into a dangerous alleyway. Alexander followed, finding Ryan cornered by two armed men. "Let him go," Alexander commanded, his voice calm but firm. One of the men sneered, "And what are you going to do about it?" Before the situation escalated, Alexander used his training to defuse the tension. convincing the men to surrender without violence. Once they were in custody, Alexander turned to Ryan. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "You could have gotten yourself killed and put others in danger." Ryan looked down, ashamed. "I thought I could handle it." "This isn't about being a hero," Alexander said. "It's about protecting people, including your team. If you want to succeed in this job, you need to trust your training and listen to your mentors." The incident became a turning point for Ryan, who began taking Alexander's lessons to heart. Watching Ryan grow reminded Alexander of his own journey and reinforced his commitment to helping others avoid the mistakes he once made. That evening, Alexander received an unexpected visitor, Mia. She had heard about his mentorship program and the challenges he faced. "You're doing amazing things, Alex," she said, her admiration evident. Her support meant more to him than she realized. For the first time, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment, not just as an officer but as a man determined to make a difference. Months had passed since Alexander's reconciliation with his father, and his career had reached new heights. His mentorship program was now one of the most respected in the department. However, fate was about to present him with the ultimate test of his integrity. One afternoon, Alexander was called into Chief Reynolds' office with urgent news. The department had received an anonymous tip about an officer suspected of accepting bribes from a local crime syndicate. The officer in question was none other than Officer Ryan Hayes, his most promising mentee. Alexander's heart sank as he processed the news. He had seen Ryan struggle but believed in his potential. Could it be true? "Carter, I need you to investigate this," Chief Reynolds said. "If the tip is accurate, we can't afford to let it slide. But I need someone I trust to handle this carefully. You have to be objective." Alexander knew what he had to do. Though he was personally invested in Ryan's growth, his loyalty to the badge and the oath he had taken was far stronger. He couldn't allow personal feelings to cloud his judgment. He approached Ryan with caution, his face a mask of professionalism. "Ryan, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Are you involved with this syndicate?" Ryan's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No, of course not. I'd never do something like that, Alex. You know me." "Then explain this," Alexander said, showing him a series of records indicating a large sum of money had been transferred to Ryan's bank account. Ryan's face drained of color as he looked at the evidence. I don't know how this happened, but I swear, I didn't take the money," he stammered. Alexander's heart tightened. "You've got to help me figure this out, Ryan. If you're innocent, we need to prove it. But if you're lying," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. That night, Alexander spent hours combing through the evidence, questioning Ryan's colleagues, and reviewing surveillance footage. He found something unexpected. Ryan had been targeted by someone in the crime syndicate, but he had been too afraid to report it. The situation was far more complicated than it initially seemed. After weeks of investigation, Alexander finally uncovered the truth. Ryan had been blackmailed. The crime syndicate had planted the bribe money in his account as part of a larger scheme to manipulate him into helping them. The officer had been too terrified to speak up, afraid of the consequences for himself and his family. Alexander made sure the real culprits were brought to justice, clearing Ryan's name in the process. Ryan, deeply ashamed, thanked Alexander for his unwavering support. Though Alexander had successfully uncovered the truth, the incident with Ryan had left a scar on him. It had tested his faith in the people he mentored and reminded him that not everyone would live up to the high standards he set. It was a painful reminder that even the best of us could be swayed by fear or temptation. In the aftermath, Alexander was invited to attend a law enforcement conference, where he would be giving a keynote speech on leadership and mentorship. As he prepared for the event, his mind wandered back to his own tumultuous journey, his struggles with addiction, his falling out with his father, and the people he had let down. It had taken years for him to rebuild his life, and even now, he couldn't escape the ghosts of his past. But as he stood before the audience, addressing officers and civilians alike, Alexander realized something profound. His story was one of failure and redemption, but more importantly, it was a story of perseverance. "My journey hasn't been perfect," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've made mistakes, I've lost people I cared about, and I've let my pride get in the way. But the one thing I've learned is this: redemption isn't a one-time thing. It's a constant process of owning up to your mistakes and working hard to make things right. The people who need your help the most are the ones who are often the most afraid to ask for it. And that's where we, as mentors, come in." The crowd listened intently, and as Alexander spoke, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was why he had taken on the role of mentor in the first place, not just to teach others but to learn from them, too. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that's what mattered. After his speech, Mia approached him, her eyes shining with pride. "You've come so far, Alex," she said softly. "I knew you had it in you." Her words meant more to him than she could ever know. As Alexander continued to grow in his role as a mentor, a new challenge arose that threatened everything he had worked for. The department faced a significant budget cut, and resources were being reallocated to other divisions. The mentorship program, along with several other vital initiatives, was in danger of being dismantled. One evening, as he walked into Chief Reynolds' office, he saw a grim expression on the chief's face. "Carter, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. The mentorship program is on the chopping block. If we don't find a way to secure funding, it could be over." Alexander didn't hesitate. "I'm not giving up on these officers, Chief. I'll find a way." Determined to save the program, Alexander began working tirelessly, reaching out to local businesses, government agencies, and even alumni of the police department to raise funds. He organized a fundraising gala, where he invited influential figures from all walks of life to speak about the importance of mentorship in law enforcement. The night of the gala was a turning point. With the support of his colleagues, the department, and the community, they were able to secure enough funding to keep the program alive. Alexander's leadership and determination had saved the initiative, and he knew it was worth every sacrifice. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.